Okay, good morning. You can catch me on Twitter at @TheSamBarnes. I'm posting the occasional article at thesambarnes.com. As Brett said, I'm currently an engineering manager at M&S, where I manage developers and, of course, assist with the very heavy consumption of Percy pigs. And I'm also, again, as Brett said, the co-founder of PathfinderDPM with Brett Harned, and we're hoping to take DPM to the next level with training and consulting that focuses on the realities of managing digital projects versus just the theory. So, here we are at a big London conference in the shadow of Westminster and Big Ben. What innovative and groundbreaking idea can I talk about? Well, this was the very question buzzing around my head months ago when one day, in what was a pretty new job, I was in a one-to-one with one of my team, Leanne, and she came up with something rather unexpected. She made a comment that she was impressed to see how much I'd done in such a short amount of time. Now, to set the scene, I've probably been there about 12 weeks, and in that time I genuinely felt that my contribution to my team and the company had been pretty much zero. From my perspective, I'd spent my time doing a few one-to-ones, meeting key people, and just trying to understand how this big company operated. But what I'd not done by then was help deliver anything. I hadn't conducted any appraisals, contributed to strategy, so what on earth was Leanne talking about? Well, I went back to my desk and had a bit of an internal battle with myself about whether to actually ask her, because it kind of translates to, "Hi Leanne, my head and ego are massive, but they need a new boost anyway, so can you please tell me why I'm so great?" Although, if you saw the doodles of me at work, you may agree on the head size thing. It's lovely, isn't it? But you know what I mean, just asking someone why they think you're good, just major cringe. But because I was just completely baffled by this, and I was trying to think of an idea for a talk, I decided to ask. So through gritted teeth, I did, and her answer really surprised me. She said, "It's just things like when we have our one-to-ones, you say you want to check we're okay and enjoying our job. This is such an important thing to say, but I've only heard it once before in my career. It's the little things that make the difference." And that got me thinking an awful lot. It got me thinking about how maybe my own criteria for contributing to the team and company perhaps wasn't quite right. Subsequently, that got me thinking about what other things people do when managing people or projects that they don't even realise are adding to positive feelings and success. So I want to shine a big spotlight on some of the little things that are so often overlooked, despite them being so impactful and able to change people's entire perspectives. For example, here's something little, changing perspective in a very big way. Oh, so cute. Amazing. Okay, so to get us started, I'm going to talk about something that I feel underpins absolutely everything when it comes to leading people or projects. You could have the best client, team, and boss in the whole world, but getting this wrong will end in disaster. I'm talking about keeping on top of your own workload. After all, I honestly believe to be an effective leader, you absolutely have to set the very best example when it comes to being consistently on top of your own work. Never forgetting anything, never being late, and just having your house completely in order so that when you're trying to encourage others to do the same, you're not being a hypocrite and you're showing that it can be done. Now, there's so many different productivity methodologies out there. For example, you've got the POMODORO technique, don't break the chain, the action method, and I think the winner of the best name goes to eating live frogs, do the worst thing first. It can be really hard to choose one, but there's no doubt about it. We all need some way of managing our workload. And this is made even clearer when you get to see firsthand what happens when one of the best engineers you know has to manage a digital project. That's right, under a table in the middle of the day and no longer capable of sentient communication. He really was a wreck. However, Tim is a genuinely awesome person who gave me permission to use this photo and, who I might add, delivered his project brilliantly in the end. But for me, I kind of got lucky, and very early in my career, I was introduced to Getting Things Done, or GTD, as it's known. It was invented by David Allen in his 2001 book, GTD, The Art of Stress-Free Productivity. And while it's a huge book that contains an entire set of systems designed to help you manage both a busy professional and personal life, what I found is that I only really need to use 3 parts in order to keep on top of things. And they are inbox 0, next action, and waiting for. So inbox 0 is something that many think is a myth, but it's not. It just takes a few weeks of doing it before you become disciplined enough to achieve it regularly and thus feel the benefits. It's simply when you ensure that your inbox is empty at the end of every working day, as well as throughout the day, as much as possible. So how do I personally approach this? Well, I move all of my mails into folders, but only after I read them while asking myself one question. Does this email contain an action for me or not? If not, I read, understand, and move it to a folder. If it does contain an action, I log it with a due date and add it to my next action list. Likewise, if there's a mail containing something I was waiting for, I'm going to tick it off that list. And that's it. That's how you achieve inbox zero. No sorcery involved at all, just simple rules and daily discipline. The entire point of this is geared towards not just being productive, but also emptying your head of stress. And as DPMs and leaders, I think that's what we need more than most. The rationale David Allen actually uses for this is to compare someone with a job like ours versus someone who cranks widgets all day long on a machine at a factory. He asks the reader if they think the widget worker clocks out at the end of the day and then has trouble switching on from work. Do they spend the evening complaining about stress? Typically, the answer is no. And having done many years of manual labour before getting into this digital space, I can testify to that. But why is this the case? Well, it's because when you crank widgets all day long on a machine at a factory, you clock off and leave, and you can't crank widgets anymore. And on top of that, you know that the next day will be exactly the same. No surprises, just more widget machine work. Thus, it really occupies your mind when you're not there. The main point here is that a big part of poor productivity, stress, and feeling overwhelmed is actually heavily related to how much we try to remember in our heads. An example of this is someone with a constantly full inbox. Without realizing it, these people are not only trying to remember all the things they need to do, who they're waiting for things from, but there's a constant subconscious and mentally draining worry about what's in their inbox that they haven't yet read, that may need their attention and could ruin their week. Plus, they don't get the same clean break when they leave their office, because whether they choose to or not, they can work if they want to. But by using just 3 simple elements of GTD, it allows you to remove so much from your head and mirror the widget worker's mindset. And if you do this right, you too will leave the office feeling good, because your to-do list will be completely up to date, so you're not trying to use your brain to remember things. You'll know there are no emails that could contain neutron bombs in your inbox, and thus, kind of by default, you pretty much know how tomorrow is going to play out. So seriously, give that a go and see how it feels. I guarantee you'll be astounded at the difference it makes, not only to your stress levels, but also to your productivity and thus your reputation as someone who always has their shit together. Just curious of that. So what kind of thing will I log on my next action list? Well, there's the obvious ones to do with chasing clients for feedback and so on. But I also create much smaller tasks, and nothing to do with my clients and everything to do with my team. For example, I'll set myself reminders when someone is off sick. Now, one reminder is going to be to make sure I do all the appropriate related admin, but another will be the exact opposite of admin. It will be to ensure that I personally check how the person is when they're back at work. Now, I've no doubts that many of you out there will think this might be way over the top in terms of organisation, but I believe making sure I check on people's well-being is really important. And as I mentioned, what seems like a tiny little thing to remember is much better logged somewhere and out of your head, as opposed to trying to remember it where it's adding to stress. Plus, I believe logging this action is important because I do genuinely care about everyone that works for me. But without the reminder, as work gets busy, and precisely because it's just a little thing, it means it's so often forgotten. And while you may not notice, your unwell colleague certainly will. This way, I don't forget, and I get to show each of my team that I sincerely care about their welfare. And over the years, I've received a lot of feedback that this goes a lot further than many leaders seem to realise. In fact, when I was researching for this talk, I found so many of the little things that people and teams really appreciate. They appreciate them precisely because it's the little things that are often forgotten, and because it's the little things that build and constantly reinforce their belief that their manager cares about them. So why is this beneficial? Well, I think that's summed up perfectly in a quote from Monty, the British World War II commander, when he said, "If you gain the confidence and trust of your people, and they feel their interests are safe in your hands, then you have in your possession a priceless asset, and the greatest achievements become possible." And I think that's just as true today as it was back then. So what other little things can you do to show your team that you care about them as people and not just as mouths to feed or a means to a commercial end? Well, one thing is making sure they're always present on all communication channels. And by this, I simply mean that you do your absolute best to get back to people quickly. I've worked in environments where your mails or messages, they wouldn't get answered until 4 to 5 days later, or sometimes not at all. And when this is considered normal at a company, it directly affects how I feel about not only the person ignoring me, but also the company as well, and that's never a good thing. But of course, I understand. You're people managers, project managers, and you've got 2 million emails, 30 Slack mentions, and 50 DMs. So I'm sorry, people are just going to have to wait, right? Well, no. Controversially, I'm afraid I don't agree. I think that's you forgetting what it's like to not be in a leadership position. Or it could just be a sign that you're either really overworked, unorganised, or both. But I'm afraid I still believe that's no excuse. I believe that as a DPM, you should be seasoned enough, you're probably paid well enough, and your expertise is meant to be in managing and communication. Thus, you should be able to get all of your work under control and get back to people promptly. You personally may think nothing of slow or no replies, but the feedback that I've had, especially from people in the early days of their career, is that a lack of reply often generates quite a lot of anxiety for them. They tend to assume that someone higher up the chain isn't happy with what they've been sent. But at the same time, they won't even chase or mention it, even if they see you in person, due to fear. To understand this, you only need to look at this highly scientific graph based on a WhatsApp message that you've sent. Now, as you can see, science has proven what we all know, that 2 blue ticks and no reply is one of the most traumatic experiences a human being can suffer. But seriously, please give it a go. Get back to people quickly, especially the rookies. And when it comes to comms, another little thing that goes a long way is getting back to people when you say you will. Again, the most obvious thing in the world to say, and yet it's one of the most common failings I see busy leaders making. If you tell someone you're going to get back to them on a certain day, make sure you do. And this is another thing where GTD is so useful for me. Because each time you don't get back to someone when you say you will, it erodes a part of the recipient's trust, and thus belief in you. As a manager of people or projects, you absolutely must keep your word, always. Even if you've got no update on the thing you're meant to be replying about, show some respect and send a message to say exactly that, and when you'll next be updating them. Because in our jobs, I think trust and integrity are some of our most valuable currencies. Another little thing that many people seem to have issues with is checking people's availability when booking meetings. I kind of expected a little laugh there. I think people that consistently fail to do this have a very different understanding of the company's organisational chart than you or I. To them, it seems to be structured a bit like this. Now, maybe you don't mind, but in my experience, most people do mind, and I tend to get a teeny bit frustrated by this. And by teeny, I mean it makes me want to kill. To illustrate this, let me introduce you to this man and this dog. Bear with me. So imagine the man is the person about to crash my calendar, and the dog, that's me. This man's about to crash the dog's calendar with a slap. Here we go. So he is about to crash the calendar. And that's the look. That's exactly the look that I'll pull. And I think it's the right look. Look at that. I crowbarred that into this talk completely. Okay. Now, often it's senior people that do this, so I'll either decline and explain, or I'll try to shuffle my schedule around to accommodate. I don't know all of your situations out there, but I won't therefore suggest that you decline each time. But what I will say is that if this is normal behaviour where you work, you don't have to mirror this. All right? And by not doing so, I guarantee, especially in environments where it's common, people will start to realise that you go the extra step of checking people's availability. In other words, you respect their time, unless you care about them on some level. And if you ever do have to crash someone's calendar, in the invite, just apologise for having to do so. Again, such a small thing to do, but it really does make a big, big difference to people that you thought about it. And while we're on the topic of meetings, when booking them, another small consideration that goes a long way is to consider what time is best for each individual. For example, some people are terrible in the mornings, while others find it to be the most productive time of day. Me personally, if it's before around 10 a.m., I'm basically Satan. I mean, in my defence, scientists do say that starting work before 10 a.m. is similar to torture. I'm not even joking. There's actually some science from an Oxford uni professor backing this up. I don't really care. I just want this to be made the law now, quite frankly. But seriously, think about things like this when sending invites. And if you don't know and you happen to have the flexibility, just ask people when they prefer a meeting. Some will be so grateful they're not forced into a critical meeting first thing in the morning. while others are going to be grateful you're not disrupting the most productive time of day. But the mere fact that you were thoughtful enough to ask will go a long way, and it shows that you care about them as people and not just as money-making robots. I mean, to me, all of what I'm talking about here really amounts to being a good citizen at work. And this is something that Sean Salter wrote about in her article, Manners Make Me Happy. I can honestly speak from experience that when working on big things and approaching breaking point, good manners can so easily be forgotten. But if you can ensure that you display good manners, especially when the world's falling in for you and for your teams, it's not only noticed, but it's hugely appreciated by people and goes such a long way with them when it comes to them working hard for you in the future. As Sean says, be nice, be polite, and watch the outcome. Now, another area where managers can show they care about their people in their team is in one-to-ones. And often, these are the first things to get binned when a manager gets busy, and this is a huge, huge mistake. You absolutely must do regular one-to-ones with your team, no matter what. Even if you're a DPM, talk to the line managers and see if they're okay with you having project-related one-to-ones with people on the project team. They can be really, really useful. And if done right, they can help the person, the project, but also the line manager. As for making one-to-ones valuable, I think there's one thing above all that's crucial, and that is to actually listen to people. So this is another thing I had to grit my teeth and ask colleagues about because they mentioned it about me in the past. It was clearly a positive thing, but because I totally cringe at compliments or anyone fishing for an ego boost, I never actually asked anyone and figured as long as I keep doing what I'm doing, people will keep liking it. However, I realized that to explain this to you, I needed to understand it. And so I went on to full-on cringe mode again and asked a couple of those people what they'd meant. And one past colleague, Chris Rubino, explained it like this. She said there's essentially two things a manager can do when one of their team tells them something in a one-to-one. The first is to basically appear interested, but then do absolutely nothing about anything discussed, to the point where the team member has to repeat themselves in a series of one-to-ones, and consistently, no actions are created. Alternatively, Chris said, a manager that actually listens will always be proactive with follow-ups, whether it's actually completing actions or just mere verbal check-ins to say they've not forgotten about the chat and the actions. Then, even if something couldn't be actioned and the manager couldn't make the situation better, there's a genuine sense that they tried their hardest against a resistant environment. And Chris ended her reply with something I love, and I think is one of the key takeaways of this talk. I can't remember the exact context, but it's easy to remember feelings, and I always felt like you gave a shit. So that was just a very small selection of the little things you can do to show your team that you really care about them. But what does that unlock that's good for you, your company, and the projects that you work on together? Well, one big thing it unlocks is the ability to be completely honest with your team. And this is probably, I think, the single most important you have to get right as a leader. Because being a leader isn't just about saying the things that people want to hear. It's also about dealing with the tough stuff. And it doesn't get much tougher than when you need to talk to someone about their conduct or their performance. And it's here that I see many managers and project managers fall down. From what I've seen, most tend to go overboard and destroy people. Or, quite frankly, because it's really difficult to do, they bottle it and they'll sanitize conversations. They'll dial down what they wanted to say, and all at the expense of progress. However, when you sincerely care for your team, and they really do know it, it allows for complete honesty without the awkwardness. Kim Scott, a former management coach at Dropbox, Twitter, and Apple, has named this approach and written a book about it. It has a fantastic title, Radical Candor, Be a Kick-Ass Boss Without Losing Your Humanity. And it's an approach that I cannot endorse enough. One quote which I think sums up a fundamental law of people management is this. I would argue that criticising your employees when they screw up is not just your job, it's actually your moral obligation. And guess what Kim says makes this a whole lot easier? That's right, being a genuinely caring manager to the point where each of your team knows it. And guess how you do that? Through consistently paying attention to the little things. There's a very simple diagram that illustrates where radical candor sits within the dynamic of two people. So you've got the vertical axis here, which Kim calls the give a damn axis, and you've got the horizontal, which she calls the willing to piss people off axis. I think this is all pretty self-explanatory, so I won't go any more into it right now, but I just want you all to know about radical candor so you can go away and read up on it. Because I cannot I can't stress enough just how important I believe the link is between genuinely caring about your team and your ability to be a truly effective and honest manager. Now, one of the silliest little tweaks that I found is one that many wouldn't even consider experimenting with, but I found it actually means quite a lot to people, and it's something I discovered completely by accident. I'm talking about letting people text their manager to say they're ill, rather than phoning in. So when I first became a manager leading critical projects, people would call me in the morning if they couldn't make it in. It's pretty normal, right? Well, yes, except I always hated calling my boss in the morning when I was ill. Why? Because I was bloody ill, and I should have been sleeping instead of awake and talking to my boss. I mean, really, is there a more awkward phone call? You ring up and you have this overwhelming compulsion to sound ill. And while you don't deliver an Oscar-winning performance, it's something I've always found so strange. So when I have a good relationship with teams, I let them text me rather than call. And it turns out that this tiny little change means that people feel trusted, as they don't have to pretend to sound ill. I personally believe that forcing someone to ring their manager is something left over from when phoning up was actually the only option. I'm talking about pre-texting, pre-internet days when, without meaning to, it's kind of created a management culture in today's connected world that sees it as super important that people ring up rather than text. Well, I call bullshit. If you're a manager and feel the need to speak to someone when they say they're ill, I think there's probably some trust or superiority issues there that you should be addressing pretty quickly. However, remember when I said that I discovered this by accident? Well, the honest truth here is that I first asked people to text me instead of calling me, well, because quite frankly, often these calls would come through when I was just out of my morning shower. And I was naked, and it felt so bloody weird, right? Seriously, think about it. So ring, ring, yep, hi, how you doing? Yep, you're not coming in, okay, hope you feel better soon. But, but for this whole call, my bits, they're out, right, look. All right. Okay, now that's not me, right? It's just a stock photo someone found that really does look like me. And I'll tell you what, I wish I had his life. It turns out that this looks so much like me that some people at work felt absolutely compelled to make something and leave it on my desk one morning. Thanks a lot, team. Anyway, moving on to FLEXITIME and remote working. When it comes to these, one simple rule to always follow is this. If you don't trust your employees to work flexibly or remotely, you shouldn't have hired them in the first place. All too often, I see trust issues here that can lead to two closely related cultural issues that, if not stamped out immediately, will absolutely kill any positive working environment where flexible remote working is allowed. And these two things are employee guilt and employee sneer. So employee guilt is when someone at your FLEXITIME-friendly company feels that they can't leave for home until 5:30, even if they finished all of their work for the day. It's also when remote working is an option, but people still come into the office all of the time and they don't need to, due to the sort of cultural shame they feel about all the other colleagues coming into the office all of the time. Employee sneer is the other side of that coin. It's when there's an unwritten rule, you get to glare and bitch about anyone arriving after 9 a.m. or leaving work earlier than is culturally acceptable. Now, I've worked in environments where this guilt and sneer existed, and that was despite there being a really open policy on flexible remote working. It infects everyone, and worst of all, once it starts, it's self-perpetuating, and before you know it, it's a staple of the company culture. As a people or project manager, you simply cannot allow the pressures of delivering work to enable the birth and growth of these as cultural norms. Because while you may very well deliver a few pieces of work in this climate, I guarantee it will eventually wipe out any profit that you make in staff turnaround, low productivity, due to really, really poor morale. Another little flexible remote working tip that people really appreciate is if you're sending messages or mails out of standard working hours and it's not an emergency, make sure the very first sentence or in the subject line is a clear statement that you're not expecting a reply until the next day. And this is for two reasons. It shows that you care about them and their life, and thus by default you respect their time. And it may just stop you pissing someone off when you don't even realise you're doing it. It may not be obvious to you, but as you progress through your career and climb the ladder, you pick up a certain amount of authority along the way, just like when you become a project manager. However, if you're actually a nice person and not someone who gets drunk on power, what tends to happen as you gain authority is that your view of yourself remains relatively static compared to other people's. Others will see you as senior, and to some, this means they're going to do whatever you say, hopefully out of respect, but unfortunately, sometimes it's due to fear. And one way this manifests itself is through out-of-hours communication. So when a manager sends out-of-hours message to someone in their team, they'll often get a reply. That's awesome, right? Well, no. Because in many cases, the person replying doesn't do so because they happen to be working late as well, but because they feel they have to. However, the nice manager just assumes their team member is working as well, and so they'll reply to the reply, and round it goes sometimes, all evening and into the night. So while the manager carries on with their week, the employee gets really demotivated by the feeling they had to work out of hours yet again. And over time, this can be really wearing on someone that works for you without you actually realising. Once again, it's the smallest of things that can make the biggest difference to people and their lives. So I've spent this entire time suggesting little things you can do to help people around you and thus the projects that you work on together. But what about you? When leading people or projects, it's so easy to fall into the pattern of helping everyone at the expense of your own sanity. Well, guess what? You're no good to anyone when stressed. So there's a whole heap of little things you can do that can help keep you sane. And these are mostly small mindset tweaks that have a big impact and basically have stopped me from imploding when the going got rough. So first up is assuming people mean well. What I mean by this is that you should always be starting conversations with people that appear difficult, believing they mean well, even if their opinions and proposed solutions run in direct opposition to yours. The fact is, very rarely is there only one solution to solve any given business problem, and equally rarely are people actively trying to be difficult. I think a quote from Cole Scotland always helps me remember this, when he says, "A sign of complexity is that the experts don't agree." But in some cases, that may be a little harsh, as there's often factors that you have no control over that can play a big part in making others difficult to work with. For example, something I've spoken about many times before, when introverts and extroverts work together. So imagine this real-life example. You've got me, an introvert DPM, working with an extrovert CEO, and we're working on a new business pitch together. Here are the facts. We both love digital, we both enjoy our jobs, we both want to win the work, we both want the project to go well if we win it, and you know what? We both get on, personally. So how could this possibly go wrong? Well, one area where introverts and extroverts feel and behave very differently is where risk is involved. Specifically, introverts are more risk-averse than extroverts. The science behind this is all to do with the fact that extroverts actually get a happy buzz in the brain when taking risks, whereas introverts find risk-taking an absolute affront to all logic and common sense, because for them it causes the very opposite feeling, one of mental pain. And this is because there are actually physical differences between introvert and extrovert brains, with introverts having more and thicker grey matter in the prefrontal cortex. And this is the part of the brain that's believed to be linked to abstract thought and decision-making. Thus, there's another belief that this is why an introvert will spend more time thinking things through before making a decision, while an extrovert will want to live in the moment and make a decision with much less thought and thus higher risk. On top of this, both brains also react differently to reward, with extroverts responding much more strongly to the dopamine hit they get when a high-risk move pays off, hence their desire to do it again and again. And this is also why you see extreme sports often dominated by more extroverted people. So, in a pitch scenario, the extrovert CEO, they want to be more risky with the sale with regards to what the client is promised, by when, and for what budget. This makes extroverts happy. While the introvert DPM, they want to try and keep things, in their eyes, more realistic with minimised risk so that the project can go well. This makes introverts feel happy. Simply put, despite the huge differences and new business solutions being proposed, both CEO and DPM do genuinely mean well and want the best for the client, the team, and business. But without understanding each other, both could easily assume the very opposite and label the other one as being difficult to work with and not meaning well. Raised understanding, education, and awareness allows both parties to combine forces and leverage their differences rather than dilute their potential combined strength. But this can only happen if you always start from the position of assuming people mean well. So rather than hating and bitching about difficult people, actually talk to them in a human and personal way about why you're finding it difficult to work together. All too often, the reasons are not what you think, and they're also judging you completely wrongly as well. Another thing I often see is when you have people that passionately believe in a solution yet become bitter when it doesn't get buy-in from senior management. As soon as a strong opposition is met to what they think is a great plan, some people so quickly jump to the conclusion that the other party is being stupid or stubborn for selfish or nefarious reasons. Now, sometimes that's true, but often what I see is people pitching a solution while failing to realise that it's not their idea that's necessarily bad, but it's more a case of the idea being too big for the amount of trust that exists between both parties at that time. In other words, the leap of faith is just too big. What some people consistently fail to see is that, rightly or wrongly, if enough trust doesn't exist to allow progress at the desired speed, rather than assuming stupidity or malicious intent, instead do what's required in order to gain the trust necessary in order to implement your plan. And one way you can do this is to break up your grand plan into much smaller pieces that you'll actually be allowed to deliver. If you can start to deliver smaller pieces successfully while being able to show tangible metric-based benefits, which is something that's so important for gaining trust and yet so often forgotten, then you should start to see trust growing, and with it, the amount of freedom you have to propose slightly larger pieces of work. And this leads me on to another personal mantra of mine that has helped keep my sanity over the years, and that is that real expertise is making progress in an imperfect environment. So many moons ago, I'd be one of these people getting furious at why management wouldn't let me run with my big ideas that I was sure would improve things for everyone. But as the years rolled by and I worked in and with so many different companies, I began to realise that many people mistake having expertise in a specific area as the only qualification they need in order to be trusted and allowed to run with their big ideas. And when they don't get approval, they throw their toys out the pram, give up, and become very bitter, negatively affecting everyone around them. And this is not how to lead people. And this is one of the many paths that lead to really unhealthy and destructive them and us divides within companies. After seeing this same cycle for many years now, I now believe that a demonstration of true expertise in an area is not only when you know all about something, but when you can also successfully implement positive improvement within different business types against the inevitable resistance from others. This belief helps keep me sane, and also encourages the strategy of implementing smaller pieces of work, thus making people's workloads better piece by piece, as opposed to using that exact same time to make no progress at all while making lives worse through negativity. In that scenario, there really are no winners. It has to be said, though, sometimes a particular imperfect environment you find yourself in isn't one born of the usual reason, which is politics, and instead is due to a few people that are just so painful to work with, or just flat out bad. In these situations, one of my favourite quotes is this: before you diagnose yourself with depression or low self-esteem, first make sure that you are not, in fact, just surrounded by arseholes. So, when you find yourself surrounded by toxic people that are doing damage, what can you do about it? Well, I'm pleased to say that Robert Sutton has come up with something that may just help you fight the good fight. His technique is outlined in his book with just the most wonderful name, The No Arsehole Rule, Building a Civilized Workplace and Surviving One That Isn't. And in this book, he studies how toxic people affect companies and their staff. He then created a calculation that allows you to put a dollar figure on what financial damage toxic people are actually having. And as we all know, people tend to listen a lot harder when money's involved. He subtly named this calculation the total cost of arseholes, or TCA for short. So what's the calculation? Well, based on studies of workforces, he found the following. He found that there's a 15% average bullying rate in companies, with 25% of bullying targets that will eventually leave their job, as do 20% of those who witness the bullying close up. So say we use a company that has 1,000 people, and it costs that company around £10,000 in time and money to replace someone. That would mean that you have a total of 150 people who experience bullying, and 38 of those would probably leave. If each of the bullying campaigns just had 2 witnesses, that's 300 people. Following the 20% calculation, that means that another 60 people would also leave the company. So you're looking at a total of 98 people leaving, with the total cost to replace, or in other words, the total cost of those bullying arseholes being around £980,000. So even if you remove all of the long-term negative culture effects and just focus on the money, the question for those at the top suddenly becomes, does keeping these brilliant jerks make commercial business sense? And that's bearing in mind that often the reason given for keeping these toxic people around is due to how much revenue or value that they generate. Well, this is one way to offer a comparative figure for management, and Sutton says that once the figure is known and believed, most management teams immediately remove the toxic person. But while this is obvious, I know that proving this out in your own companies, it'd be incredibly difficult, maybe even impossible. However, what I do believe is that the more mental links we can create at a management level between toxic behaviour and measurable financial loss, the more conversation would actually start regarding these bad people. And that would lead on to raised awareness, not just about the financial holes that they create, but also the emotional damage that these bad people leave in their wake. So please, get this book under your boss's nose and start trying to create those mental links. Another little tip I have for you is when you need to make a tough or scary decision. Commonly, it's things like deciding whether to accept a new job or whether you should be honest with your boss or be on a stage like this. But really, it's about anything that scares you at all. I apply this approach all of the time because I can tell you right now, I'm the absolute master of finding thousands of reasons why I shouldn't do something, when in fact the reason is just fear, just scared. So what helps me settle the matter is when I'm scared or confused is to flip the proposition on its head. So rather than think of all the reasons I shouldn't do something, I simply ask myself, will I regret it if I say no? And if the answer is yes, I would regret it, I close my eyes, take a deep breath, and say yes. Now, does that stop the fear? No, not at all, but it does get me to a decision. And since using this approach, I'm yet to regret any of them that I've made this way. And that's because I passionately believe that opportunities are rare, fear is temporary, but regret is eternal. Now, I appreciate that's a bit deep. So here's a slightly more blunt way of explaining the same point. It's better to shit your pants and die of constipation, right? Amen. Amen. So for my final tip about how to keep yourself sane at work, I'd like to advocate something that I also strongly believe in, and that is that being professional doesn't mean you have to be dull. What I mean by this is, all too often I think people mistake the phrase being professional to mean you have to suppress your personality at work. I see people doing this all the time in person, on calls, and it just doesn't seem right to me. I believe we should be who we really are, both in and out of work. In fact, I think to be somebody else is to be slightly disingenuous and making work far more stressful than it needs to be. But to be crystal clear, I'm certainly not advocating that if you enjoy the occasional drink at home, that you should live the party lifestyle at work. Nor am I saying that when you attend interviews, that you should answer questions if you're sat at home with friends. No. What I'm saying is that that is my favourite. What I'm saying is that accepting who you are, being comfortable with who you are, and bringing that person, the real you, into work, it makes a noticeable difference to how easily you can combat stress, because you're not having to remember who you're supposed to be, while at the same time you're showing others that it's totally okay to be yourself at work. I mean, it seems to me that many of us think we should be portraying this kind of image of ourselves at work, when in fact, and certainly in my case, the reality is much, much closer to that. So I'm simply saying to bring the real you to your professional working day and let your personality shine. When brands do this, we smile. For example, this is what you find on a Virgin Train toilet seat. And I saw this amazing Hotel Shampoo branding recently. How great are they? Just like with these, I find that when you're really yourself at work, warts and all, people can sense this and they warm to your sincerity and your authenticity in a work world full of plastic smiles. So the next time a recruitment agency is fishing for new business, instead of just replying with a dull message, be yourself. In my case, send a crappy meme reply. Or, if it makes your team smile, why not let them turn you into a virtual human centipede? I know, sort of funny, and then becomes quite disturbing quite quickly. But I honestly believe, being yourself at work makes you a happier, less stressed person, and it means people enjoy working with you so much more, which, as we all know, often directly translates into better results for team morale, and in my experience, that also means financially. And that's true for all of the little things that I've talked about today. and many more that I didn't have time to go through. And in the process of putting this talk together, I've come to realise a few things that I'd like you to go away and think about. I've learned that your current understanding of what constitutes contributing to team success may not be entirely accurate. And you may well be overlooking lots of little things that you do that your teams and clients massively appreciate. On one hand, that's great, and you should keep doing all of these things. But just be aware, if you don't know what these things are, how will you ever know if you stop doing them? And this was my mistake. I was assuming that I would never change, and thus whatever it was that I was doing also wouldn't change. But of course, this was me being, as usual, a complete fool. Everyone changes as time passes by. The cold hard truth is that I was placing my own fear of looking like someone fishing for an ego boost over and above getting really important information that would help me, my team, and my clients. I'm constantly preaching to always be humble, and I still believe it's one of the quintessential qualities that a leader must have. But this is just one area where you're going to need to trust that people will continue to see you as someone with humility when you ask them for honest feedback on how you manage them. And you never know. Their answers may just surprise you, and I'd put a lot of money on them liking and disliking lots of tiny little things that you weren't even aware you were doing. And once you find out what these things are, and this is the important bit, you need to raise them out of your subconscious and lock them into your conscious, everyday thoughts. Only then can you actively continue to do them, but now with the added advantage of being able to ensure that you never stop. Plus, you can even begin to experiment with your own newly discovered skills. I also learned just how important these little things really are. Of course, the bigger things are important. Company strategies, new large clients, big work programs, and so on and so on. But what this journey has convinced me of is that if you try to successfully deliver the big things without getting the little things right, at best, you're making it difficult for everybody. And at worst, you may just kill your whole company. I've become even more certain of this now by retroactively mapping what I've learned onto past real-life work experiences. I would say that a company's ability to retain good people and deliver the big things directly correlates to how good they are at getting the little things right too. Companies and leaders that get this wrong forget how the absolute basics form the very foundations that we build all of the bigger stuff on. And when that bigger stuff crumbles on those weak foundations, so many, they look for instant scapegoats, quick fixes, and new technologies, rather than doing what's needed and going right back to the essential things you need to effectively manage people, projects, and then working upwards from there. The simple truth is that if you look after people and yourself properly, the projects and the deadlines take care of themselves. And to truly look after people and make them feel valued, well, it really is all about the little things. Thank you.